What's popular YouTube? Another day, another shameless ad plug on Thorin's channel.
Oh yeah, that's right. You're asking if I have like a daily practice or whatever. I don't have a daily practice of doing specifically meditation or whatever. I would say I do it fairly often. But again, I would just like the problem is I'm not really the sort of person who does the same thing every single day. Even though I do understand, right, this is going to be another of my donated discussions. But since for this episode, I think this has happened once in history, there's only actually one person either was free to come on the chat thing or wanted to. There was technically supposed to be another person who turned up, but whatever. It's their own prerogative to not turn up if they want. They paid the money. What we're going to do for this one is largely I'll let this person ask me whatever questions or topics they want to discuss, but we're also discussing just before we went live. You can maybe explain now. Like maybe we do some stuff also that's not technically just esports stuff, but it's stuff that's tangential to what I tend to discuss or people seem to want to ask me about. So what did you have in mind when we were setting that premise up?
Yeah, so basically things I'm interested in general, just productivity, personal development, meditation. And I saw a bunch of your videos that even though I don't follow battle rap, I still thought it was very interesting to have those people discussing their approach to doing things. So maybe I would like to start, if you don't mind, just on Alan Watts. So you did a video on him a few years ago, I think, but mostly on the, being Zen and trying to not basically care about what other people think, what's happening, just trying to live in the present. And obviously said many more things. But those are the main things that had an impression on me. Is that still something that you think about, that you still read, or is that kind of influence from the past that you actually maybe not care about it anymore?
I would say for Alan Watts, he's more someone where to me it's like Terence McKenna. You mainly listen to the talks because he's another guy where there are like more than you could ever count YouTube videos that are all of the different talks he did over the years. You can download a bazillion of them if you know where to look. And there's basically like an unlimited amount of discussions about any of these topics, obviously largely Eastern mysticism, etc. I would say this, what I find interesting about philosophies like that, I could even draw an obvious parallel, I would say, with like Stoicism and all the Marcus Aurelius stuff, is I think it is really useful to a certain degree, but I think that what attracts people to it is the notion that they're going to become, essentially, let's be real, they think they're going to become like James Bond and just like not be reactive to anything anyone does, but still be sort of like totally in control of all their emotions and their frame. And, like that sounds great. And obviously that would be, maybe that would be like a masculine fantasy we'd all have, that we could be that guy. I don't think you can actually be that guy though, personally, I have to say, like, unless you already, I don't really know what background you have to come from. I would just say to this, that model of the idea of like Zen detachment or Stoicism, I would say it's more like something you just use every now and then to get yourself out of trouble or to reassess a situation you're in. I think it's useful if you do that. Like an example I would give you is, and this came from people like Alan Watts, Robert Anton Wilson, people in that sort of vein, was I find if I'm ever on my own, but I feel like I'm in an emotional situation, I find if you almost talk about yourself as though you were the narrator, think about like fucking, what's his name? David Attenborough on one of those BBC ones. If you essentially just narrate it as though you were watching a documentary about yourself as whatever animal would be in this documentary. So you just say like, oh, he seems to be upset about something. If you just do that, again, it's just a way to sort of get yourself out of your own mind for a second and see yourself from a different perspective. And so I find stuff like that more useful for that. It's more like if you're ever stuck, you're in trouble, or you need a way to sort of like, essentially the premise is you can't, if you feel in a really intense way, you can't just say to yourself, I am not going to feel it anymore. Like consciously, it's not going to work like that. You've got to use you've got to have some like, tools in your toolbox, as it were, What's your interest in that sort of field?
I mean, basically I was a very anxious guy, like, 10 years ago. And since I started basically meditating, but even everything around. So for example, Sam Harris Waking Up app, he does have like 100 hours of Alan Watts or something there now.
All right. Okay.
And then Tim Ferriss, who also has a very famous podcast, whenever he invited anyone, okay, what's the secret to your success? Like 70% of them would say meditation.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
And then Ray Dalio also wrote recently a book that was quite famous and I quite like. He also says meditation saved his life, etc. And I think I've heard you mention meditation also in one of your shows. Is that something that you do, or is it maybe, like you say, maybe in the moment, but it's not like a daily practice? Is this something you would recommend other people, like either esports or even just people in general life, if they're stressed?
Wait there 1 second. They just assume you just did it because you were going to get $10 million at the end of that year if you did all this business. Whereas I think if you actually go and look, I'm sure you must have noticed this yourself. If you ever go and listen to interviews with really successful people, even in the world of business, they tend to have other reasons for why they did it. Like it is things like mastery, like maybe they wanted to become a master at persuasion, or like just marketing, or fucking psychology. There's always some extra hook, I think, for everyone who's really good. Because at the end of the day, as much as people might think it's a cliche, if you can basically make it so you're doing things you enjoy, it just isn't working the same way, mate. It isn't a grind. Like I always tell people, the reason why it's so silly that plebs try to tell me like anyone can replace me as the esports story and blah 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 blah. It's like, first of all, mate, like it takes forever to research shit in esports, and the joke is I can do that because I actually enjoy it, believe it or not. Like for me, it's like revisiting my own life because I was there, so I get to see, oh yeah, I remember that detail and how it connects to this. To someone else, it's just not going to be as interesting. Like there might be the odd person, but like even when there is, without naming names, when I see them write an article, they just get half of it fucking wrong anyway because there's no context. They had to make it up as they went along and connect fact A to fact B to fact C. So to me, I'm also lucky that I've got an approach that works, which is if you do things that you genuinely want to do, it's less that you feel like you're forcing yourself to do it. It's more like you feel like you're compelled to do that video, etc.
Do you think that was also true in the first, let's say, 10 years where you're grinding away for basically no money?
Nah, because it is the other thing. It can't be. Like, it's why this is why the whole area of, like, self-help is so interesting. Because, morons just go, like, the midwit take goes, like, it's all just fucking scam. If you were really good, why do you need to sell that book to do it? Which, by the way, invalidates, like, every sports coach, and just everything in history, basically. Is the idea that apparently you would just succeed yourself in that way. It doesn't make any sense at all, but I get why they come up with it. The problem they have there is almost every field that has anything legit in, obviously then is overrun by scammers because they see legit stuff. They try to camouflage their scam / their whack version of it as the legit stuff. Happens with every single area of life, fucking vitamins, meat. Well, there's a billion things. So as a result, like, to me, if you're, let me think how to phrase this. Let me think. Like, basically, when people tell you that really famous line that goes like, essentially it's what Joseph Campbell said, it's like follow your bliss. It's like the idea that you're going to find your passion in life and you're going to do that. Here's the problem that they don't tell you. This is why essentially you can't just be told things, you have to experience them. It takes ages to actually figure out what your passion is. Your passion isn't what you really like to do when you're 15 years old. That's why I actually feel really sorry for the kid who just loves music because it just touches him in some way, and he has an acoustic guitar, and so he just assumes he should just be Bob Dylan or something. It's like, mate, you're probably not going to make it. Like notice there's no reason I've given so far that you would make it. You're just a guy who's interpreted the fact that you love music as you're going to also do the same type of music. So it probably took me, I would say something like, maybe it took like 5 years before I got to the kind of work I'm doing now. Like the kind that I'm talking about, essentially I would do for free. And essentially I do for free sometimes, in the sense that like some of those YouTube videos I make about like CS in 2003, that isn't really worth my time, is it? Like there's about a million things I could do with that exact same amount of time that would make more money. But it is worth my time in the sense I want to make that video. Like it's an interesting topic to me. So I would say the real secret to life seems to be find something that's interesting to you. So obviously you're not going to know how interesting it is when you've only fucking put your toe in the pool. You're going to have to properly immerse yourself, and then you hopefully find something that you're good enough at that you can combine the two and make a living from it. And the premise should be, for my money, it's a bit like a startup mentality. It's like in the short term, you're going to put up with the fact that it's going to be annoying to get into this field you've never been in, because it's just really fun to do the work. It's just something you actually want to try and do or challenge yourself.
Yeah, the one component, I mean, obviously it's implied, but it's the get so good they can't ignore you, which is, I think Steve Martin had in his book about stand-up. Basically, he's explaining that he toiled away for years and years and years, and then overnight he became the top guy in the world. And
sure,
basically it does seem from the outside that it was overnight, but actually he did spend all those years. And then when he was very good, obviously that probably wasn't like work to him. It was he just went and did what, let's say, became his passion, but it's out of habit and out of doing it so many times.
It's why, if you think about it, it's so silly that most people still live in a fantasy world where they believe, like, Like, put it this way, I'm a meritocracist, but I don't actually believe that's how reality works. I know reality is far from like who's the best and should get out. Like, that's essentially it is a utopian dream. You know, it's not really possible. It's essentially what I say when I say I'm a meritocracy. I would just try and be as fair as I can be to people, no matter what I think of them. But that's not really the philosophy that like anyone in the world collectively shares. But I would say like the main problem is, most people do actually have a basic assumption that the world should run that way, you know. Like, they think if I'm this good at my job, then I should get this job. It's like, that's not how jobs work, though. Like, what you have to ask yourself is, what are the mechanisms at play here? Like, how does the person who hires you for that job decide who gets the job? And it's usually things like your social status, your accomplishments within the field, references from people you know. So essentially, it's some form of like other aspect than how good you are at the job. It's things like marketing, social skills, all these. And that, if you notice, one of the problems with young men, I can tell you this from my own life experiences, the last thing you want anyone to tell you if you think you're like skilled or talented in some way, but you don't have any social skills, is, yeah, you're gonna have to work on your social skills. It's not really gonna work. They don't want to hear that. Like, they want to just go, no, that's nonsense. Like, oh, I shouldn't have to. Like, you know, but you notice that's like the fundamental rhetoric of left-wing people at the moment. It's like, well, it shouldn't be that way, but why? I don't believe it should be. Like, I think it should. Like, what are you talking about? What is reality is the question, not what your fucking fantastical ideas would be.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you're young, or if you're an introvert, which, you know, most people in the internet are. And actually, I see that in girls, they're way less likely to ask for things. They're just like in the hope it would happen, especially in the workplace. So yeah, I think that's something that's kind of with experience. It's almost impossible to teach that, because, you know, as many times as I probably read it, only when I learned from personal experience, where I saw, you know, incompetent people in my eyes getting promoted ahead of people I knew were smart but were not, you know, doing the social stuff, or even just plain asking to be promoted. That's where, you know, really reality hits you in the face.
That's why, to me, experience is like the ultimate fucking value, essentially, because it's like, I can't remember who said this quote. I should probably look it up to see like what the real version was. But there was some quote that said something like, you sometimes have to be told something 1,000,000 times before you realize what it means. And I find that with almost all interesting like life advice, you know, poignant things that I said, you can experience it for like 10 years. You could see that same quote or same piece of art 1,000,000 times. It might just mean absolutely nothing. But then one day, if you've been through whatever experience puts you in a similar, presumably, mind state as the person who made that statement, suddenly it's like the most amazing shit you've ever heard, you know?
Yeah, I mean, my favorite quote on that is, when the student is ready, the master will appear, which is basically that. Like, you could read the same thing. I mean, everyone knows that you should sleep, you should eat well, you should exercise, but, you know, no, people just don't do it. And then they have a health scare, then they start doing it. Yeah,
that's also how you know they didn't really know it, though. They just consciously thought, yes, that is a good idea. They didn't, like, in their bones know it, you know. It's like this is total reality trick. Because if you did, you'd act on it, you know.
I mean, yeah, maybe. So for me, the big change for me was maybe like 20 years ago, and it's at the time when the book called The Game came out, which was on Pugnatio.
Sure.
Of course, the examples themselves today would be cancelled, but at the time, just basically bringing awareness to personal development, which is, look, you can't just go around and just because you're smart think you're going to get far. In this case, get girls. You actually need to, you know, just have confidence, etc. Then there's better books that explain how to actually get girls. But at the time, just that's what's flipped the switch. And then there's all the others, like 7 Habits, etc., that give more examples of, you know, what are good habits that someone should have. So actually, on that topic, is there any other habits that you'd say people should have? And it doesn't have to be for everyone, maybe for esports athletes, for example. Or maybe as a separate question as well, what do you think of just people who take, I don't know, either not drugs, like hard drugs, but Adderall and stuff like that? How does it compare to caffeine or G-Fuel that you seem to like a bit more? What are good
like
things?
nootropics or something, you mean?
Yeah, that could be an example. Basically,
the problem is I don't really know much about that topic. That's more like Anders shit that he's into. Where he knows a lot about like supplements and stuff. I only know them from like the vitamin side for diet stuff. Like, I've in my entire life, I think I might have taken Adderall like 2 times ever, and it's so long ago, I could barely even explain what the effects were.
Okay, what about then just in general habits that that you think, helped you be successful, even if they're
I mean,
very trite.
the number one habit to me is one that, funnily enough, this is what's so perfect about like the concept of how all real wisdom can just be hidden right out in the middle of the street. Like people just won't acknowledge it as what it is, and they'll just walk past it thinking it was nothing. Probably the best technique I learned in the last 10 years was from a book that is definitely just like one of those fucking airport books. Like, it's a garbage book. Like, it's one of those ones where if you read the first 3 chapters, that's the whole book, but you had to make it a whole book for you to have to pay him $10. So he just wrote like 10 more chapters that are just like, a different way of restating the same thing. And it's a book called The One Thing. I'll have a look who the author is. Let me have a look here.
I've read it. It's quite good.
Yeah, it's the one I actually recommended to you, I think. But, yeah, basically, if people don't know, the premise is, again, another thing is as well, I don't always try to do exactly what they do. I try to see like what the essence of what they were trying to do was, and then do it in my way. So basically, the premise of this book is that every day you make yourself a little to-do list. But the problem is, when people make themselves a normal to-do list, they just immediately sabotage themselves. They just lie to themselves. Every single thing on the list is of equal value. So they start doing 5 things at the bottom of the list that are like, get the cat a new lead. Make sure you got milk. Meanwhile, number 1 on the list was like, write that important letter to your mom or something. So they don't do the most important things. And essentially, at the end, they just use some fuckery like, I've took 6 things off the list as a way to make themselves like, yes, this works. Whereas what you do instead basically is you are brutally honest with yourself. When you make the list, top 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, you really is, whatever's number 1 is the most important thing you could do that day. And as a result, you make yourself do number 1, number 2, you start at the top, basically. The only time you don't is, say, the thing at the start at the top could only be done at 5 p.m. and it's 10 a.m. Yeah, obviously you can start on number 2. But generally, you just make yourself maintain that. And as I've always said, genuinely, if you can do the number 1 thing on your list every day, you'll already be ahead of most people. If you could do the top 3, you'll be a really productive person. And if you could do somehow the top 5 things on your list every day, you would genuinely be, I don't know if you'd be like a billionaire, but you'd be an incredibly productive person. Would you share a similar sentiment if you've read the book?
Yeah, no, for sure. And that's also where
seems so easy, doesn't it? But like, if you tell someone, it's so hard to even get them to see what you're saying differently from normal. But that key part I say about you have to be brutally honest. If you do that, that's the secret, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, especially once you get to a place where you can actually influence a bit the things you do. Like if you're, let's say, starting your job and your boss is just giving you shit after shit or data entry. I mean, of course, putting more data entry in your data entry job is not going to get you very far. But if you do write in your to-do list, okay, what can I work on in myself that will make me better or get the next promotion? And then do that and spend even 20% of your time doing that, then yeah, you'll get very far, very fast. For me, the issue now is just, I mean, obviously, after doing that a bit and getting to a place in your career where to jump, you'd have to do something entirely different. So, for example, the most obvious thing, and is the example for me, is sales. Like, I don't particularly like sales. I already make enough money to get whatever I need. So I could spend time just getting better at sales, but I just won't do it. So that's just the one thing that. So it's the one thing is not related to the book. That's the thing that right now, I don't know, it's again because I'm old and I don't care anymore, or because there's certain limits to how much you can go into the productivity books and just circle around and just not actually do the thing that you need to do. We just start reading books for intellectual masturbation. But that's where I'm stuck now. So even though I have the book there in the shelf next to many other books like that, but then getting it into practice, it's a bit harder if you don't have the motivation.
Sure. I mean, that's another thing I think you also need to do. It's like essentially, you have to learn where to find motivation in each day. Like I'll give you an example. You come from the old school of like being an old school fan. You used to follow CS 1.6, right?
I mean, only barely. I was more into.
Right. Did you ever watch any of the old Frag movies?
Yeah.
So famously, if you ever watch one of those Frag movies, first of all, because it's like real music, not like some fucking free shit you have to do. It's actually one of the reasons why CSGO movies suck, if you notice. When it had like real like music that you've all heard in other contexts in your life, and the frags are amazing, it makes it all seem better, doesn't it? Like the frags seem even cooler, the player seems cooler. And like I've always said, if you watch one of those, I'm sure people have the same phenomenon when they watch the major. Right after you watch it, you'd want to go and play it instantly, wouldn't you? You want to just boot into the game and be like, oh, fuck yeah. So what you've found there's a way you can literally generate like 5 minutes of motivation to play CS. So essentially you do the same thing, but with tons of things in your life. So, for example, one of the things I've found seems to be a pretty core habit of people who are very creative is keeping loads and loads of notes and things like that and writing out your thoughts places. It's not that you actually then have like a mega system where you go and you revisit it, but it's more the idea that like, say I felt like doing a video after doing this call here, but I don't know what topic I want to do. I would just go into either my folder or the text file where I keep loads of my ideas, and I would just scroll and I'd read a bunch of the ideas and I'd wait till I find one that just hooks into my mind and I go, oh yeah, fuck, I forgot about that one. That would be interesting. I could add this detail. And then all of a sudden, like I'm 90% of the way to making the video. But if I didn't have those notes, even though I did think those thoughts once, like I wouldn't be able to generate motivation in the same way, you know. So to me, I think one of the most whack things people do is where they, essentially what the whole premise of that book, The War of Art, was about. It's where they sit there and then they think that like motivation's just like a fucking fairy that comes along randomly once a month and taps you on the shoulder and says, oh, here's a great idea, by the way. Whereas in reality, as far as I can tell, it's more like getting your mind into the state where you then just become a creative person, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, obviously writing down everything that comes to mind, that's like the basics of productivity. That's something that actually, it's a habit that's, you know, the more you do it, like the bigger is your stack, then the easier it gets to
for sure
find a topic or even find links between them. Because, you know, most original things, especially if you're going to write or make a video, is like connecting two ideas on two different fields that no one did the connection before. So that's something that obviously if you're just starting out, it won't be very original, but after a while you will see, okay, this guy here did this, I can apply this in CS or something like that. So yeah, that's something that's very, very useful. So switching topics a bit, I mentioned the sales and the influencing. It's maybe not directly related, but one of your things you have on your side channel is the battle rap interview. And actually, I'm quite curious about it, but also what do you take out of it? Because obviously it's very different from whatever real life. And it's not actually, you know, I don't think people are actually angry at each other, but it's a quite interesting, almost persuasion. And it's not just persuade the other person, but almost the crowd and the rhythm. And there's just so many different things that come into one discipline that just seems so random that I'm actually just curious what you take out of it, and yeah, why you got interested, or who is the best and why do you like him? Yeah, anything that you find.
I mean, basically, battle rap is just the same as UFC. It's just two people compete against each other. And then the reason I also say at the UFC is, like, if you know the way the judging is done in the UFC, there's plenty of times that they say someone won a fight who definitely didn't win the fight, you know. So famously in battle rap, a lot of the time they don't even judge the battles anymore because, like, it's so subjective who you're going to say is the winner. It's more like you just let the fans collectively and as a consensus decide who won or not. The whole reason I was ever interested in it is because it's just really intellectually stimulating. Like, anyone who listens to rap music just as in hip-hop music, obviously one of the premises of why it's supposed to be great is lyricism, right? Like amazing lyrics that paint a certain picture and have clever wordplay. Basically, battle rap is that times 1,000. Like, if you actually listen to the best battle rappers, you will realize, and I'm not joking, even people like Eminem are actually not very impressive. Like, he does that, like, he's the equivalent of doing what he does with a teleprompter. I'm talking about people where it's not that they're making up, but they're doing it while they're starting to remember what they said. You know what I mean? Like, so... And there's another thing people probably don't understand. Ever since about, I'm going to say, 15 years ago, almost every battle rap video you see on the internet it's all pre-written. They're not coming up with any of it on the fly. No one's freestyling anything. Like, occasionally, if someone's exceptionally skilled at that area, they might freestyle something in the moment, and they'll almost do it, like, intentionally so you can see they're doing that. As in, if you mention something at the end of your round and they're next, maybe they'll directly reference that, just so the fans know that, like, well, there's no way he could know what he was going to say, so he must have come up with that. Like, you might do it like that to show you're really clever, but in general, it's all pre-written stuff. So basically, they're basically just really good poets, essentially. I mean, obviously, they don't think of themselves as poets, but that's what they're doing, just working with language, interesting imagery, really clever stuff. So all the stuff I like, basically, the people who you can just go, like 10 years later and watch the video and pick up lines you didn't even figure out at the time. Because the other thing as well, this is why it's a very niche though as an interest, is essentially you have to know all the newest rap slang, which... Yeah. I mean, I only know it from watching these videos, essentially. So if you're not actually from, like, the hood in America... like there's a sort of an information burden when you first get into it. Like essentially you're not going to know that the guy said an amazing line because you won't really know what he's referencing with some of the slang. But if you knew what he was referencing, it might actually be like the most insane line you've ever heard, like just some incredible like metaphor he made, or the way they do something with like, essentially if you know anything about poetry, like the way you do things so a word sounds the way it would be spelled. There's all sorts of clever things you can do with it. It's probably actually one of the most misunderstood like niche hobbies ever, because people just assume, like you're suggesting, that it's like just people like, hey man, what's going on? And like it's none of that shit. Like I say, it's more like it's sport. In the same way as if someone thought two UFC fighters were really two guys in a backyard punching each other, they'd be a fool, wouldn't they? Like it's about a million miles from that. But it obviously came from that.
Yeah, and even if you're just listening to Eminem, which you given as an example of maybe not as good as some of these, but obviously just if you get like 10% of the stuff he's talking about, just the fact that so many words are being said and they all kind of rhyme with each other, and it's aggressive, and so yeah, it's obviously amazing if you're in theory doing it spur of the moment.
Put it this way, it's a really famous misconception that a real rapper would like destroy everyone in a battle, right? It's the other way around. Like, basically, the problem is, it would be like a boxer going into MMA. Like, you could even be Floyd Mayweather, mate. You get destroyed by anyone because they just got a different skill set to you. So the real problem is, most of being like a real rapper on like records and stuff, as far as I can tell, it's just about like marketing. It's like, do people buy your persona and do they like listening to you? Like, some of the really famous rappers, mate, are fucking terrible. They don't even have any like lyrical skill whatsoever. Like, some of those ones that were actually... like put it this way, the obvious ones off the top of my head are people like, you remember those people who were in like the fucking, what were they called, G Unit, the 50 Cent crew or whatever. Like some of those people have no skill at rapping, mate. They were just friends of his or something, or some guy who like, you know, he sort of had the swagger of being a rapper, but they didn't have like technical skill or something. You weren't like, oh my god, I've got to listen to their music. Like, you listen to them because you were just told sort of fashionably that they're the thing to listen to now. Whereas like some of the people at the top of the battle rap are fucking incredible. Like, they're really like, put it this way, there's usually a divide where, like, basically sort of like the white people and those guys, they do ones where the rounds tend to be like a minute and a half or something, or 3 minutes or whatever. They sometimes do rounds for the ones where it's like the actual hood guys on URL's the main one that they do on. They do rounds that are like 5 minutes long each, mate, and they just memorize the whole thing. Like, that's fucking really hard if people don't know.
Yeah.
I know people never give that credit because they never tried it, but like, mate, just imagine someone telling you have to have something memorized for 5 minutes, and if you forget, you just stood out there. You're just done, basically.
Yeah, it's 5 minutes. If you just speak normally, it'd be like 15 minutes or something, because usually going fast, and that's insane. Okay.
So I think also probably the skill level's misunderstood, you know? Like, it actually is something where, like, put it this way, you don't walk into that field and become the best, like, overnight. It'd take you years and years. That's how good the people who do it are.
Yeah.
Like, most of the top people have been doing it for 10 years or more.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Cool. So, kind of related topic, still on the influencing thing. Something I was thinking about is just the humor of people in esports. So, maybe it's because we have similar... similar tastes in terms of comedy. But I find that almost no one does your style of, you're kind of trashing the person a little bit, but, it's aggressive enough that it's somehow people remember it. But you're obviously, it all mates at the end. And most other people it's just like memes or repeating the same stupid shit over and over. I think Rich was talking about this, about the LEC casters in your latest side select podcast. So basically from your side, who are your, like, what's a good example of a good comedic influence? Or it doesn't need to be comedy. I think you say Skip Bayless on the on the commentary. It's probably the closest you can get in terms of someone who people would know outside of comedy. But yeah, what do you think why do you think no one else has that style? Do you think it's just hard to pull off nowadays? Is it just doesn't have maybe the wider appeal that I think it has, because that's what I like? Just how do you see comedy? What are your influences? Yeah, who do you like? And
I mean, one of the problems I have, mate, is like just logically, most people aren't funny. If they were funny, there wouldn't be much demand for comedians, would there? Like people would just make themselves laugh. But if you notice, and the internet especially shows you this, they like the lowest common denominator, like idea of what is funny. So obviously you see this with memes on Twitter, is appallingly low.
Yes.
Like it really is, no joke. Someone in 2022 still saying, of course, 11-4 is the most dangerous. It's someone just like driving a meme into the ground that was like barely funny the first time you heard it, So basically, already my stuff's very different from that, because if you notice, nearly all my jokes, I always try to have a totally original element to them. It's why I'll even sort of sanitize ones that are like I haven't had time to think through, and I'll sort of say like, I know this is shit, but then I'll say like a joke that's funny in a way, but it's just not like well polished or whatever. Like I prefer that. I'd essentially prefer like a flawed gem over just repeating some other shit that was funny someone else said. Like I never understood why that was even like, to this day I sort of even look down on people who I consider friends and experts in League of Legends, mate, when like they would just like, I'll give you an example. If I invited Ender onto our show, one of them would immediately just be like, weird champ. It's like, why are you just saying stuff that like 14-year-old kids said 5 years ago? What are we doing right now? What is this shit? Like, how's that funny? Yeah, we get that. It's a reference that someone said years ago. It's not funny though, is it? Like, there's like, unless you're gonna make a joke now with it, like a fresh joke. To me, you're just a fucking ape, just bashing away on a fucking typewriter, not knowing what you're doing at that point in time. So generally, I would say I have a different perspective on why I do desk stuff and content in general than most people. Like, what's funny is, if you know soccer, you must know Roy Keane, right? The former Man United player. He's obviously an analyst in the UK, whatever you call it, Premier League and all that jazz. If people don't get it, I'm almost certain the real reason he does that job is exactly so that he can just tell everyone off for things he thinks they're not good enough at. Like, obviously, famously, defense, Alan Hansen was the same way. They're like, these are guys who have a certain, like, super high standard. And the premise is they almost want to get out there and tell you off. Well, there's an element of that as to why I do what I do, which is, I've told people this story before. When morons try to give me life advice, they could not possibly give me because they never lived my life and they actually don't even know what my life was. So a classic piece of advice they give me, mate, goes like this. If you were just a bit more polite and you were just like nicer to people, I think you'd be a lot more popular. I wouldn't. I did that for over 10 years, mate. I was ignored. No one gave a fuck. All I did was just do pure dry work, and it was largely ignored because people don't care about in-depth stuff. They don't care about how good you are. All they care about is there like a marketing angle to draw them in, or is there a drama angle they can connect to? Everyone can connect to a human interest element. They can't always connect to some in-depth shit about a player or whatever. So basically, when I used to be just a journalist and I used to go and ask these guys for interviews and talk to them in interviews and work with them on my website, etc., you don't know how pro players used to treat anyone who wasn't a pro player. Essentially, I've given this example in the past and people think I'm being silly, but I purposely made it hyperbole. They act as if they were like a Victoria's Secret model and you were some weirdo foot fetishist who came up to them after the show and said, like, can I have some pictures of your feet? That's what they would act like if you asked them to do an interview about their career, mate. The vibe was, like, this is a bit weird. Like, I just play games and I'm good at them. Like, why does this fucking loser want to do, like, an interview with me? Like, that seems a bit weird, That was the vibe. And so as a result, I've seen these fucking... and by the way, the other thing as well is, because the average pro player is like a 19-year-old kid who has no life experience and just spent the last 6 years grinding fucking video games at 2 a.m. These are some of the dumbest, least impressive humans you've ever met, mate. So one of the reasons, for real, I like to be an analyst is I like actually being able to be the person who can tell these cocksuckers what's actually going on. Like, guess what? I don't care that you were a legend 4 years ago. You are fucking shit in the game now. I know how much money you make. I know that you got that other guy kicked from the team who was better than you for political reasons, and I know that you're probably going to get someone else kicked or leave to another team in 3. So guess what? I'm going to give you that fucking work when you fuck up in the game right now, and no one can fucking stop me. Because here's the other thing. Because I've nailed my fucking persona, they're going to want to hear me trash you, even if they're your fan. Part of them doesn't, but they can't stop fucking watching. Like, have you noticed? You must have seen this, dude. One of the main groups of people who cry about being blocked are fucking Brazilian fans on Twitter. Dude, logically, they shouldn't want to read any of the tweets. But the real problem is, if someone goes, have you seen what Thorin said? They have to be able to see it, don't they? They need to be part of the drama. So essentially, I've got my own motivations behind a lot of that shit, mate. Like, I'm sort of taking that fucking Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu slogan they always tell you when you start, where they say, when you're the nail, just hang in there. Then when you're the hammer, smash them all. Well, unfortunately for them, now I'm the hammer, aren't I? So, tough shit. Also, by the way, in the early days, even I'm talking of like Twitter, I would say until something mental, mate, like 2014 or 2015. People like me and Monty and Richard, we had like 10k Twitter followers. I don't know if you know this. Yeah. Like, we almost exponentially grew. So yeah, a few years later, we have like hundreds of thousands. Well, but again, back then, any LCS player, dude, had like 200k or something. So the difference was, I'm a little shitter with 2k, and then they're someone with 200k. This is why, for example, I went mad at fucking Hawk when I got a big platform. Because it's like, oh, well, now I've got the megaphone, mate. So now let's see what people think about what I say about you. Time for revenge. So I think that's a good motivation behind why to do it. Essentially, I always hated watching those shows. Like, people think I'm trolling when I say this. I used to literally sit there, and if there was a tournament where Lurpus wasn't playing at the tournament, we were both at home watching HLTV. We would just be messaging on Skype, giving our thoughts, and nearly always the conversation would go to, like, if it was like an IEM that was being streamed or something, it would be like, man, these commentators are fucking shit. Because you have to realise, back then, the commentators would literally be 2 play-by-play guys. It would be like Joe Miller and Red Eye. You know, like, there would be like no guy. So the premise back then was like, fuck. Imagine what we would say if we were there. Like, I would say this, and I would, you know, this guy's overrated. I would destroy that immediately. So I always kept that in mind, mate, when I got to that point in the gig. I was like, I'm just going to do shit my way, and I'm going to make myself laugh. I'm going to do what I think's fun. And if people don't fuck with it, which is fine, I would even say, by the way, in the modern day, I actually feel like the current generation probably doesn't vibe with my shit very much. Like, they do seem to just be on the meme tip. So if you notice, like, what happened with Call of Duty, where they were all just like, what is he? He's just like going mad. Like, I think that's almost like what the modern Zoomers like when they see my work, unfortunately.
Yeah, the problem is, especially if you're trying to get the biggest number, you have to get people who basically don't speak English. So,
of course,
it's those memes. That's basically why they get the most upvotes on Reddit.
So if you notice, I've sort of accepted the last 2 or 3 years that I'm going to be more of a niche individual. You know, I'm not going to be the biggest guy in esports.
Actually, I mean, yes, not the biggest, but I actually do think that's why I was asking, why don't you think there's too many more others? Because, I mean, people who grow up playing games are now older, and there's honestly not that much. I mean, that's basically part of the reason that at least I am a patron. I want to see things that are entertaining. I like games, and no one makes it entertaining. So, like, what the hell? Is there only one guy that can make this? Like, it makes not one, of course. You know, Monty and Richard are good examples of people who can also do it, but I would expect there to be more. I would expect to go to other games to say, okay, who is the person here? Nope, no one. So that's why it's sad. And actually, since you mentioned those interviews, it's actually quite curious that all these legends, especially when you start to trash talk them, the thing is, like, a year in, you can actually see in their eyes, well, he might be criticizing me, but he's the actually only person that remembers I was a legend. So they actually start to appreciate and even come on your shows and interviews because they realize, oh shit, my legacy, you know, is gone, and now I am a cheater. And, you know, at least the best I can do is have an interview with Thorin, and people might remember that.
That's also part of why there aren't people who do what I do, though, mate. Which is, you notice if you're anyone whose job is to give your opinion, all that happens is every single fan base just says you hate the player that they like. They don't say you just don't give them credit or you're a bit too harsh. They say you hate the player they like. So what happens is you just get bored of it, mate. Like, I can handle it because I don't do it for plebs. But, like, if I was someone who had any, like, public validation component to my work, I've always said this, the fans would be the main reason to quit, not anything else to do with the job. Because it's like, the joke is, you say, like, Reckless is the 3rd best European League of Legends player ever, and they go, wow, who hurt you? Wow, did he fuck your mother or something? It's like, who wants to have this conversation? Like, this is just a waste of everyone's fucking time, isn't it? It's like not worth his time, my time, or your time. Like, who wants to sign up for that? So unfortunately, to me, the people who are really interesting all have to go through that phase where dickheads just say you hate on everyone. If you notice anyone interesting, the same phenomena happened. LS, all of them, mate. Every person I've worked with who was interesting like that always goes through, like, dickheads just hating on you on the internet, basically.
Yeah. Okay, so then more generally, just on, obviously, you know, you have your own style, but are there any influences, any comedians that you like that you recommend? So when you said cocksuckers, it really sounded like Joey Diaz that used to go on Rogan a lot. So I don't know if that's one. But is there any comedians or people you'd recommend people watch if they like your style?
I mean, my favorite comedians from back in the day, like Bill Hicks, got to be a massive one. I even think in terms of, if you look at how he's done his career, it's probably influences on my own. Like, just the idea of radical truth, essentially. Mm-hmm. I was always a big fan of Doug Stanhope. especially like the 2000s era. He's just an amazing comic, just so many funny angles. Funny thing is, I at this point in life probably wouldn't agree with almost any position he has, but he's just a great comedian, so who gives a fuck, right? It's just funny shit.
Yeah.
I appreciate people like George Carlin, even if I don't always think their actual material was the funniest. I think they just made, it's a bit like Bill Hicks, made a lot of really good points about society and life and that sort of jazz.
Yeah.
Let me think. In the modern day, I think the two most obvious modern day people are Bill Burr and Louis C.K.
Yeah.
Probably the most two consistently funny people the last, say, 10 plus years. Feels like, I mean, the case of Bill Burr, if you ever listen to that podcast he does, he genuinely can just talk about any topic and it's just about equally as funny, isn't it? He's just a funny guy.
Yeah. Even the ads are funny. Yeah, actually, that's something that you also do. But he's really
that's why I took some. That's why I took some of those cues, because I just noticed. It just makes it 10 times more interesting, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, those are good examples. Obviously, Louis C.K. now kind of cancelled. He actually just announced a new Europe tour, but obviously sold out.
Problem is, though, who actually cares about that? Like, how do you cancel someone who makes jokes about his dick? Like, you can't. You can just say they're cancelled. Like, the biggest problem, as far as I can tell, mate, with cancel culture is people just saying it. Like, the people who essentially don't believe in it, but reinforce the premise it's real. Like, the joke is, if everyone who's a Louis C.K. fan just bought his new special and went to his next gig, he'd be doing totally fine, wouldn't he? Yeah, he might not be able to make it big in the mainstream world, mate, but that's also like without doing a whole digression, you wouldn't want to make it big in the mainstream world, mate. It's dog shit. It's just diminishing returns. What you want to do is make it to a certain degree, and then once the compromises become way too crazy that they expect you to make, you want to just check out there and just have a cool career with some freedom, but you don't want to push the envelope.
Yeah, and I mean, I said it's cancelled kind of also off joke, because obviously he's making millions now with selling his stuff directly. But actually, that's one of the points. My favorite comedian is Anthony Jeselnik. He does like kind of one-liners, dark one-liners.
Sure.
And he also says that it's like people complaining about being cancelled. Like, come on, you're in a podcast. You say whatever you want. Don't complain about being cancelled. Like that's not something mainstream podcasters like Rogan or something like that should be able to say, because you're uncancelable basically. Cool.
Like, the main problem isn't even that you actually ever get cancelled. If you think about it, the real problem is this: most platforms that people use, which they get banned off, which is what we're calling cancelling, essentially that's the main link that your fan has to you. So because your fan passively supports you, yes, if you get banned off YouTube or Twitter, they are going to sort of forget you exist. Which I would say, unfortunately, spoiler, he was never really your like true fan. He was just a guy who sort of liked your shit if it was put in front of his face at the right time of day by an algorithm. Now, obviously what you should do, and this is where actually I know like comedians, for example, have done some good work here, is what you want to do is do things like build up a fucking email list or a Substack or something. Essentially get people off the platforms where they can ban you and into a method where you can like still stay in contact with them, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, obviously, like I think the best example is Sam Harris, who now is basically the only last person that can say stuff against the left, against the right, and be fine. So yeah.
I mean, I'm sure he makes fuck tons off that podcast, mate. Like, I don't support it anymore, but I used to pay for it for a couple of years, so he must have loads of people paying for that.
Yeah, and the meditation app, yeah, is quite good actually. In
fact, that's what's hilarious, mate, is I listened to his podcast for so many years, but this is all you need to know. I wasn't aware the app ever came out because I stopped a few years ago. Yeah. So I heard that story about him making that fucking app for about half a decade, mate. And then the joke is now it's actually out and I wasn't even aware, so...
Yeah, it's been out for a while. He now has loads of stuff, loads of talks, even like obviously mostly meditation stuff, but a lot of other stuff like the Alan Watts talks and a lot of other stuff that's actually quite interesting. Even a bit in Stoicism, which is like kind of the thing we started on. He has a bunch of kind of podcasts there on that.
Do you want to know something really cringy, by the way? I don't give a fuck, so I'll just tell you. One of the main people at the moment who's almost like a custodian of Stoicism is a guy, he's probably the one you're referring to. He's an author called Ryan Holiday, right? Yeah. I believe that's his name, right?
Yeah.
Mate, this guy is so embarrassing, it's unreal. Like, I'm not joking. Think about his premise. His whole thing is he's presenting and embodying Stoicism to the world, right?
Yeah.
If I told you during the last election he was wigging about Trump constantly, doesn't that somewhat take away from his appeal as a Stoicist, you know?
I mean, clearly, like,
come on, mate.
He kind of looked out into being the only one doing it. And
he did. Yeah, for sure. That's kind of his niche, isn't it? Yeah, I know. But when I saw that, I was like, mate, that's your whole philosophy. You've just violated the whole philosophy. You're just triggered about some stupid politics shit that won't matter in even a year, you know?
Yeah.
Not alive. Just what people are liking it.
That's hilarious. And obviously, I mean, I like his stuff in terms of basically bringing awareness for books like Meditations for Marcus Aurelius, which is kind of forgotten. And now, obviously, everyone has it in their top 10 lists of this type of advice, let's say. But yeah, the guy is a bit, I say, weird. He also like went to leave.
It's because there's a lot of people like that, mate. Like, one of the things I've totally changed my mind on is, you know, that whole thing people always say, you should always separate out the author from his work. I actually think the opposite now, mate. Like, from what I've seen in life, people who actually were cool, they embodied their philosophy in the world. They actually go out there and live it. Like, they mean what they say. Like, those are just the coolest people you'll ever meet. And obviously some of them might not be like some next level philosopher, might just be a cool guy that just lives in your community. Meanwhile, if there's someone out there where their whole life they're a fuck up and an idiot, or they, you know, they can't hold even a basic relationship down, what are the odds that their thoughts are somehow actually genius but just couldn't in any way interact with their own life? Like, in some ways, I do kind of think the proof's in the pudding.
I mean, yeah, but that's just more general. Like, it's like expecting esports players to have any other good personality characteristics. Like, they're just good at the video game. Like, they are very good at the one thing, and then everything else you're basically just projecting and hoping that they're whatever you want them to be. But they're just a guy, and most of the time, you know, people are weird. So.
It's why, if you notice, one thing that triggers the fuck out of me on my Discord is when people give advice, they don't even follow themselves. Like, I won't say the name, but there was a guy the other day on the Discord, for real, just linked to like a YouTube video, and he goes, check out some of these videos, could be neat for you guys, I haven't looked at them myself yet. It's like, why the fuck are you telling us then? What, so you want us to go and look at a bunch of videos you think might be interesting for us, but you aren't even interested in watching? Like, people might think that's not a big deal. That's a fucking joke. Like, who is this idiot that he's so important, that our lives mean fuck all, and he's just there to assign us homework? Like, basically, it's not a joke. If I tell people something that I do or something I believe in, I actually do it. Like, I don't get, like, I'll give you an example, and it's for a very serious reason, which is I genuinely believe 99% of things we're all programmed to say, but that we don't know about. So I'll give you an example. If I asked you something like, what was the Roman Empire like? You would immediately tell me like 5 things you were told in history class when you were like 11 years old, right? Yeah. The problem with that is, though, if we all just go around like little robots just repeating back shit we've never even looked into, all we're doing is just spreading a bunch of fucking nonsense. Like, we're not even having a conversation at that point in time. Meanwhile, if we only talk about things we actually do and actually live out, then we're actually going to get to the fucking sort of the interesting shit. Like, that's actually probably something worth doing. Like I mean, think about earlier in this convo, I could have just gaslit you like, oh yes, meditation is the most wonderful thing. Yeah, you should always be doing it 3 times a day. But I don't say that because I don't do it, you know.
Yeah, problem, even if, you know, half the people are enlightened enough to think that, then the other half is like adverse selection. It's just only the, you know, shit posters that end up, posting crap, basically. So yeah, that's the downside of basically all this productivity stuff is.
Oh, for sure. There's like every area, mate, there's not only a lot of time wasters, but there's also motherfuckers where the joke is their hobby becomes just talking about it and not doing it. You know what I mean? Like, mate, we have so many in that fucking Discord. You notice I cleaned a lot of them out in those first few months, where they wanted to go into that fucking channel about food and lifestyle and talk about diets and exercises they don't do every day. And they would be doing stuff, dude, like, I don't really know if I would want to. Like, who gives a fuck what you think or want, mate? Like, are you doing the diet or not? Yes or no? If you are, okay, now talk about how it's affecting you. Is it working for you? Who gives a fuck about their, like, pronouncements? Because if you notice, another thing in the modern day, this is why, unfortunately, media has warped people's brains. Because what media does to you is it tells you that you specifically are what the whole world is about. Everyone in the world, every company is desperately trying to reach into your mind, you specifically, and contact you and get your attention and your money. Now, on some really indistinct level, that's true. The problem is, though, when you talk to someone like me in a Discord, that isn't true anymore, but they still come in with that assumption. So bizarrely, people genuinely think that, like, we give a flying fuck whether they agree with us about a diet that we're doing and they're not doing. Like, to me, that's a total non sequitur. It's like, what would it have to do with you? You know what I mean? Like, yeah. Surely I'm doing it. Why would I care if you agree or not? But there's so many fucking time wasters like that. Because another thing as well is, if you just talk about it forever and try and get exactly the perfect way, it saves you from ever actually doing it and failing, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just the amount, I mean, like Einstein said, there's only 2 things infinite, like universe and human stupidity. So, you know, there's infinite number of those. Yeah, basically that's the problem with like the it's what I like is like the 80-20 rule, which is like, okay, learn enough to get started, or learn the few things, or learn the one thing like that book that will make a difference, and then just go do it. Put your blinds on and just execute. That's what actually makes a difference in the end. But still, the thing is, as you are, or as I am, sorry, as introvert and like to think and stuff like that, it's very easy to get trapped into this. Okay, let's think about what would be the next thing and so on. So obviously, almost some of these things that these other people do, maybe I, see myself a younger me would probably do that as well. So in a sense, it's like, okay, I guess that's just, natural tendencies online. And yeah, I mean, you can't avoid them basically. Nice. Cool.
Sure. This video was kindly supported by Ahmed Hadjou, Iskander, Mac Pugnatio Rajcula, Travis Goff, Adam Ochs, Animosity, Butt Pounder 420, Hades, Jensen Goh, Joseph Ginsburg, Kovacevicd, Tobias Bernasconi, Thooorin, William Peyton Lacy, Zoomba, Zyrathenia, and a special thank you goes out to Jerky's Minion as always. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for some of my content? Want to ask me a question in my monthly video AMA? Do you want teasers? Find out who the guests are going to be on my shows. Maybe you want to be part of one of those lengthy but in-depth and interesting discussions about esports with yours truly. Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Skrilluminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.